From an entirely cut train line to an immense landscape of empty, abandoned warehouses, the Arasaka Waterfront in Cyberpunk 2077 may just be the biggest showcase of unfulfilled ideas and broken ambitions. I once covered this place back in 2023, but to be really honest, the video is kind of dog shit. I just missed out on a load of detail and I didn't spend nearly long enough in this location. So today we're going to be remastering this video. We're going to be slapping a £50 price tag on it, slapping a battle pass on it, and pretending like it's brand new content. So put your feet up, grab your wallet, and get settled in for a deep and dark dive into the cut content monster that is the Arasaka Waterfront. This location can be found in the north of Night City, in this nicely shaped and symmetrical square. This design is not by accident. The entire waterfront is encased in these huge walls that are reinforced with lovely things like electrified razor wire and mounted armoured gun turrets. I think the general consensus is that if you're not an employee of Arasaka, why the fuck are you here? So look, with such a huge location, which seems to be kind of secretive, right, and very, very intimidating, you'd think that the game is kind of hinting at something going on here. Something which perhaps has a presence but isn't necessarily micromanaging you with intimidation. That would make sense for the Arasaka Waterfront, but in reality, this place just doesn't really exist. It has all the bells and whistles to suggest that something big and crazy is going on here, but the actual meat on the bone is grey, watery and chewy. The easiest way to really assess just how ridiculously underutilized this space is would be to look at it from above. What you are looking at right now is the entire Arasaka Waterfront from the comfort of space. You can notice straight away that this place is absolutely fucking massive. The sheer size and girth of this place is actually kind of shocking. You can definitely get a sense of how dense this place is on the ground, but seeing it from this angle is just straight up insane. It's basically the size of a Night City district. Hell, this could be a small town in Oxfordshire with a nice couple country pubs and a local Tory MP who looks like they've been dead for 5 years. But even with this mass of concrete and metal, only this is actually playable and explorable by us. So We've got a lot to cover, right? Maybe a bit too much for just one fucking man, but we're doing it for the love of the game, right? And for the love of Tism. And before we actually break into the inaccessible side of the Arasaka Waterfront, I first want to spend a little bit of time appreciating the uncanny and hilarious entrances which can be found throughout the playable space. For a start, this entire entrance looks so unnatural. The pavements are probably the best example to begin with because these things just look bizarre. This pavement on the left is particularly funny to me because it actually doesn't make any sense. Why is this here? What is it doing? It literally leads to a bundle of generators just out in the open. Like, there's no fence. There's not even like a chain link fence, right? There's just fucking nothing. I absolutely love how this pavement begins and then just sort of gives up, not even halfway down the road. It's barely wide enough to fit one person, and considering this is right next to a busy road, this just seems extremely dangerous. My headcanon is that this is just urban hell and unwalkable American cities. There are probably thousands of real life examples of this exact thing, particularly in the United States, but then we do get some other nearby locations like the entrance to Konpeki Plaza, which just feels straight up unfinished. We have these two large and empty dead spaces, both of which sort of feel like they were supposed to be something more. The right side is particularly odd because it's the other side of these aforementioned generators. The way these trash piles are so symmetrically placed with barely any other litter between them just seems so awkward to me. Something about the direct sunlight on these sporadically placed palm trees seems so bizarre and slightly uncomfortable. It's the same story on the left side too, just another huge open space that doesn't really serve much purpose. This is a bit of a theme though throughout the playable and unplayable areas of the waterfront, so get used to seeing the same phrases like awkward, uncomfortable, uncanny, liminal, weird. You need to wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up. What I struggle to work out though is whether this minimalist design is actually intentional, because I watched a video recently about locations in Cyberpunk that you're never meant to visit by my boy Any Austin, and he actually praises a lot of these odd and pointless spaces as being an unusual quirk of great map design. To have such pointless places that are perfectly explorable kind of hypes up player freedom in a way that most games tend to ignore. It almost treats you like an adult who doesn't expect every single play space to be stimulating and interesting. This perspective is actually further backed up by the abundance of these dead zones in the real world. I've personally encountered at least a handful of these weird empty spaces in London and also more recently Singapore. From experience, they're often newly developed finance and commerce hubs which have been built over some decrepit village or abandoned manufacturing site, and they truly look really impressive, right? There's no argument to say that the architecture isn't fucking cool, but the whole place feels incredibly fake and very forced, I think the word is. But the point is, liminal and uncomfortable design can absolutely be intentional. It doesn't always mean that something is cut content in Cyberpunk's case. It can actually be an architectural philosophy, one that prioritizes corporate functionality over all else. And the waterfront, at the end of the day, is a corporate hub, so its liminal and uncanny nature can absolutely be argued to be intentional. One other intentional and highly visible oddity about the Arasaka Waterfront is this train line, which can be seen at various points in Night City's playable area. At the main entrance, this single track can be seen travelling through the closed off gates. Trains will actually drive out of the waterfront using this track, but they never seem to drive in. On the right hand side of the waterfront, you can also spy these bigger tracks running parallel to the complex. These exist all the way along this place and even connect to this giant warehouse looking building. All of this is perfectly visible from the playable area, so once upon a time I thought that this was some kind of secret area or, you know, content that would open up with a mission, but unfortunately none of this ever gets used for Cyberpunk story, Cyberpunk side quest gigs, free roam. Even with functional NCART support, you know, the train system, you can never visit this place organically. The Arasaka Waterfront probably at one point in time had a train station or maybe two that were intended to be usable throughout the play space. Without going into too much autistic detail, because I actually already made a video exploring and speculating about this entire area, these train tracks and warehouses are no coincidence. The warehouse, for example, is absolutely fucking huge. Look at this thing. There are multiple tracks going in multiple directions, often overlapping and switching lanes, all coexisting in this fully modelled and nicely detailed environment. This warehouse is gigantic, right? Like it's really, really big, and even has these weird little tiny doorways and fire escapes that would theoretically allow the player to come and go as they please. The tiny doors also have these awkward invisible barriers surrounding them, which is very sus, and there's an abundance of barbed wire fences all throughout this area, preventing the player from travelling further onto the roof. As I'm sure you know, barbed wire in Cyberpunk is always used to stop the player from venturing too far out, but this usually happens in places where the player would be, right? Like that's the whole point of it, is to create a boundary. But when this place is not accessible organically, it kind of raises some questions. You know, why is this so heavily fortified. And to really hammer home the point, have you ever looked at this little courtyard area? This is yet another large and mostly empty space, devoid of any real purpose or incentive for exploration. We do, however, get this nice glass detail which we can use to look below us, which provides a unique look into this underground homeless camp, which I never knew existed. And this actually connects to this pointless road, which then further connects to this completely unfinished part of the waterfront. This just snowballs and gets out of hand, and we're not ready for that just yet. But anyway, this courtyard space, look at these benches. What are these benches? Does this colour look familiar? Well, it should do, because these are the NCART colours. These are metro, train, monorail, whatever benches intended to be used in NCART branded stations and locations. So if we bear this in mind, this random courtyard was probably some kind of metro waiting area in previous versions of Night City. And if you don't believe me, take a little walk up these steps just behind the Trauma Team AV, because you will eventually hit these two empty cutouts where doors should be. And if you were to clip behind these fake doors, you can see that the door models do actually exist, which is pretty strange. They're just one-sided for some reason. But importantly, if you were to turn around here and actually walk back down the steps, you get this absolutely beautiful view, which in my eyes is a perfect setting for exiting a train station. If we were to assess this weird abandoned entrance from afar, we can actually appreciate just how large and symmetrical this thing looks. I'd say it looks pretty important, almost like it could have been a grand entrance to some bygone train station. This, coupled with its immediate vicinity to this large train track and warehouse, makes me think that this place was probably an old NCART entrance that was repurposed when this whole place was cut. To really rub salt in the wound here and go a little bit off the deep end, exploring through these bricked up doors actually showcases a broken and slightly logical interior. This could fully be an unintended side effect of just multiple prefabs overlapping with each other. But then, considering this is attached to a whole cut concept, you know, this NCART station, plus it exists in a nice little earth pit, which are usually done to clear way for interior spaces like, say, the afterlife, I'm a little bit on the fence about what this all means and what way I should be swinging. So to conclude our inbounds / slightly out of bounds segment, what do you think is going on? Just be honest with me. Beyond the towering gates of the waterfront's many unused entrances hide various unfinished sections of play space. The vast majority of these are made up of big, wide roads, often stretching from one side of the waterfront to the next, but with some sporadically placed props throughout to give this kind of liminal and uncanny feeling, because we have countless examples of these generic lampposts and palm trees, but these props are really the only signs of life in this otherwise desolate area. What is really cool though about these uncanny spaces are the roads, because we can begin to notice these roads which crash into things like closed off gates and full-on buildings, again creating this typically out of bounds look and feel, solidifying this general consensus that, you know, these roads aren't functional or believable. They're not meant to be taken seriously, they're just there because it's, you know, game design. But in an odd turn of events, if we were to clip through these structures, we can see that these roads actually continue. They go through, and they even end up crossing into each other and Night City itself. These janky arse roads genuinely form a coherent grid system which would, in theory, connect all areas of the Arasaka Waterfront, playable and unplayable, together. But my absolute favourite piece of jank is this road and building here, because if we start clipping through this obstacle, we can see that the road continues onwards, but for some reason actually starts to dip below ground level. Even without no clip, we can see dozens of generic double doors and empty doorways where these huge prefabbed buildings are kind of melting into each other. And although there isn't really anything of note here apart from just a great deal of mess, it's really cool to see firsthand how the Arasaka Waterfront is actually made up of like 30 or 40 individual buildings rather than just one huge structure. It's a side to map design which you don't tend to see all that much. It's something which you can appreciate if you have autism. But whilst we're here actually, this underground road exists in yet another earth pit. So if we were to use this layman logic, which I just pulled out of my arsehole, these earth pits equal space for below ground interiors, you know, like the afterlife. So this definitely suggests that there was probably once something here, right? Something that went below the Arasaka Waterfront, even if it was just a usable road, which has since been long abandoned and forgotten. If we were to follow along this road like Mr. Ben Myers, we will eventually hit a closed gate, but not just any closed gate. A gate which, on the other side, actually puts us back into Night City. Alright, you remember I said about the crossing and the grid system? What the fuck is going on? So to keep making things even worse, straight above this gate, which we just came out of, is another locked off gate, right? Which behind it reveals another giant fucking road. Importantly, this big fat road takes us to arguably the most interesting part of the Arasaka Waterfront, a place which I like to call the cemetery, because for the rest of the Arasaka Waterfront's unusable space, we are suffocated with a graveyard of broken and abandoned Night City play space. There are seemingly endless roads and props floating above a murky grey underbelly, endless amounts of janky buildings blend into one another like some kind of sick mutation. The chaotic structures stretch as far as the eye can see, with seemingly no purpose other than to connect these long abandoned and forgotten entrances in a futile attempt to become whole. The cemetery fills me with an odd emotion, the kind which you don't tend to experience in regular Night City and playing Cyberpunk organically. It's a space which oozes finality, a kind of monument to the age-old concept of what could have been. Even for the purpose of this video, I struggled a bit to spend too long in here. The pressing silence, devoid of any atmosphere, coupled with these empty building shells and distant roads spreading to nothing, really depressed me more than I expected. The only respite from this suffocating atmosphere is a little N-cart train which actually drives through this place using the same track from that unwalkable urban hell entrance. For some reason, this track doesn't end outside of the player's immediate eyesight and instead continues through this graveyard and pops out of the waterfront itself. The track is just unreasonably long, like there's no real explanation for why this exists in the way it does, other than simple cut content, particularly because it travels above one of these abandoned roads which links to Playable Night City. I think it's very likely that this was set dressing for the player when they could have perhaps driven around these long and forgotten roads. But I think fundamentally these tracks once again support the idea that the Arasaka Waterfront had train stations planned as either a usable thing or some kind of game design philosophy. Before we wash our hands with the cemetery though, I do want to do a general quickfire round of odd and interesting things which I found in this space without doing too much speculation. There's a huge spherical centerpiece attached to the waterfront's roof, which I don't think is ever really visible. Below this sphere are also dozens of generic double doors opening out onto nothing. There are randomly placed palm trees throughout this unused space. These light strips exist below the waterfront, and I have no idea what they are. This back road actually curves through the waterfront in order to marry up perfectly with yet another blocked off entrance. There is collision throughout the entire cemetery, everything visible is usable, and there's this black square underneath the waterfront near the docks. Oh, Speaking of the docks, I'm sure you've noticed that the Arasaka Waterfront does have a dock area. This portion of the waterfront is never seen in gameplay, which always seemed like a bit of a weird choice to me. The first point of interest are these large structures which stick out into the ocean. These are presumably for ships to dock and unload cargo, but we can actually explore these big three structures with the help of NoClip. The first thing that's instantly noticeable here is yet more barbed wire. These small fences sit on these ramped structures and prevent the player from climbing up to access the dock itself. Now, this doesn't seem too outrageous at first glance, but what doesn't make any sense is why these fences need to be here. Just like the huge N-cart warehouse, this space is entirely inaccessible, and this goes for every single one of these ramp structures, stretching all the way across the Konpeki Plaza side. I don't know if I need to state the obvious here, but the presence of these barbed wire fences definitely seems to suggest that the player was once planned to be within touching distance of the docks. I love this little area just off to the side of the hotel because we're presented with this nice little slice of life immersion zone where carefully placed props help sell this idea of a cohesive game world. So things like cargo crates, smaller crates, and even these little robot forklift things can be found placed throughout this spot. But it's very clear that these were intentionally placed here with a good amount of thinking behind them. But we do get some cool details like how these cargo crates are floating slightly above ground in order to make them look taller from the outside. Design like this is rarely seen with open world games because you're kind of going where you want, but these little out of bounds tricks really remind me of why I find this stuff so fascinating. This is where the game starts to blur the lines between simple set dressing and what is possibly unfinished content, because further on from this slice of life crate simulator, we have these long and empty industrial docks. Although there is a very basic structure and general concept with these places, detail is just completely absent. There is honestly nothing interesting or even slightly unique about these spots, other than the fact that you can walk around here freely without falling into the map. With that said though, the final dock structure, which just so happens to be the biggest, does actually hide something fairly interesting. This long stretch of land runs along the backside of the waterfront where this huge Vegas sphere sits, and we can notice straight away that the floor looks a little odd in this space. It looks slightly too high up and also quite flat, like freshly laid concrete. If we move off to the side and turn around, we can actually see that the concrete is indeed raised. It's fairly chunky actually, and surprisingly high up. So this got me thinking, why is this particular part of the waterfront a different design and foundation? More importantly though, does it hide anything underneath? Well, the simple answer to that question is actually yes, believe it or not. If we no-clip very gently below this raised concrete, we can see that a regular road with things like double yellow lines and even a pavement exists just below the surface. And this probably explains why there's all these random lampposts all the way out here in this completely inappropriate environment. And to actually confirm that we're not just losing our fucking mind here, the in-game map of this part of the waterfront does indeed show a little road, although it's buried underneath these red squares, which is presumably this awkward concrete. So for whatever reason, there is a huge unused and unseeable, unviewable road. The only real thing of note back here are the huge dockyard props and these massive Arasaka structures which don't hide anything inside of them. But I mean, other than that, we're once again greeted with unholy amounts of empty space and just generally nothing. It would be unfair to sit here and claim cut content when, a good chunk of this space only exists in the way it does because it's somewhat visible from Playable Night City. But alas, I think we have truly rinsed the Arasaka Waterfront dry. We have scoured this location up and down, left and right, but we can conclude that this is a gigantic, confusing mess, even 5 years on from release and on a 2.3 version. I just want to conclude this video by acknowledging the fact that it has been 3 or so months since a real video. I am sorry for that, truly. Life is just very busy at the moment, and making videos, particularly with this amount of planning and effort, has just become a lot more difficult to manage, right? Look, I just want to say thank you for being patient and checking out this video. As always, if you made it to the end of this video, type Judy in the comments, because, you know, gooning is funny these days. But that's all from me, guys. As always, thank you very much for watching, and I will catch you guys in a bit.